Hi guys, welcome to Digital TechJoint. Now in this course, as we see the progress in our section 1, we covered the key concept of .NET framework, MVC pattern routing, and what are we going to cover in our course. We also did a walkthrough of the finished product. In the course 2 section, we created the project and explained the project structure, and we also created a controller and showed how the controller and view works. Currently, now in this video, we are going to continue with course section 3, where we are going to create the overall look and feel of the project. We are going to set up the connection string, create the expense entity class, that is a model class, and complete the entire CRUD operation, that is adding of expenses, updating of expenses, deleting of expenses. So this is what is going to get covered in section 3. I recommend anyone who directly come into the course to first cover the section 1 and section 2 and then continue with section 3. Just for all information, I am going to still walk through the entire product once, the end product, so that we all are in sync. So this is how we are going to create a login page, and we're going to log in. This is a dashboard, and this is an expense register where we can record all our expenses with the date, expense category, and how much amount you've given to whom, so that you can track. And this is your expense category. So this is the end product which we are going to do. Now let's jump into our project. This is a project which we have created, and in the section 2 of the course we added a demo controller, and we showed how the demo controller and the demo view works. We are going to delete this now and get started with create. So we deleted this and we'll delete this. Fine. So now the first step we are going to do is that we are going to create a database connection string, and I'll be using, as I explained in my earlier sections, I'm going to use Microsoft SQL database for storing the data. So we are going to create a database called expense management. So this is our database, expense management. We are not going to add any table as of now. That we are going to do with the help of the entity framework migration tool, which will actually create tables and the columns using the entity class that we are going to create and the migration command that we are going to use it. So let us first click on app setting JSON and add the connection string. Call it as a default connection. You can name it as per your convenience, and this will be server store since it's a local server, and database is expense management, and integrated security is true. So if you're setting integrated security as false, then you'll have to also provide the username and password in the same connection string. So we have created a connection string over here. The second important thing we are going to do is that we are going to add all the necessary packages. So right click on the project, click on manage NuGet packages, click on browse, and we type entity framework core. So this is the package which we are going to install, the latest table 1604 version. Accept, and so this is installed. You can see the green tick. The green tick means that it is installed. Then since we are using SQL, we are going to use SQL. SQL Server. Entity Framework. Microsoft. This is for the database. We select this and install. This got installed. We also install Microsoft Entity Framework Core tools. This will be used for all the migration command, which will actually go and add the tables or modify or update the tables for us. Select this and click on install. It is installed. We will also go ahead and add system.component is model component model dot annotations. This is for the entity class and the properties that we will be using for the entity class. So we install this. It's got installed. And finally, we also will install ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core .mvc .razor Okay, so we install this Microsoft.ASP.NET Core .mvc .razor runtime compilation. This is required because what has happened after 3.1 version, Microsoft has stopped including this library default in the project. And if you don't install this library, what will happen whenever you create any project and if you make any changes in the razor page in the HTML code, you'll have to restart the entire application. Okay, so basically what we are expecting is whenever we do any CS level change or add any properties to our razor, we like to save it and refresh the browser to see the changes done. So if you don't install this runtimes, you'll have to restart your project, recompile the project every time. So after you add this razor library, make sure that you go to the programs and you add the support for this razor compilation. So how do you do that? Is that just after this class create builder, click on enter builder dot services dot add razor pages and add razor page runtime compilation. This is required. So just add this entry. So guys, we have set up our project. We have added the necessary packages and we have added the database connection string over here. Now let's go ahead, and the first thing which we are going to do is that create a data layer. So we'll create a DB context class. So I just call it as data layer. And I add a class DB contest expense management. So this is my DB contest expense management class. Now in this class, I will refer entity framework core. And here the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to inherit DB contest class and then click on the DB contest class, select on this icon and select generate constructor DB context expense management options. So basically we will declare this and we will actually go ahead in the program files and add a dependency injection to this class so that it connects to the database. So I will show how to do that. For now we just declare this and then we go to our program files and then add the dependency injection. So before we do this, we just have to refer our class. We'll have to refer using Microsoft dot sorry, entity framework code and using expense management a project name dot data layer, and we go ahead and inject our connection string defined in the app setting.json class. So see add db context and then you call your data layer class, that is db context expense management options, enter options dot use ms SQL server and then builder dot configuration dot get connection string, and what is the name of the connection string we defined over here? It's default connection. Let's copy this, paste it over here, and we close this. So this becomes we have injected our connection string over here. So having the code set up over here and the code set up over here, we will be able to establish the DB connection. So now let's proceed and create our entity class, that is our model class. So first we are going to create a basic expense entity and then we'll enhance it by adding expense category. Okay, so for the first step we'll go ahead and create a class as expenses or expense entity. So this becomes our entity class. Now we go ahead and refer system dot component model dot data annotation. So we refer this class and we define the properties. Now these properties are nothing but this will get represents our table in our database expense management. So we go ahead and declare the properties. First is public int expense id get set, then we have prop tap and then we say date time and we say expense date, okay. So we have to change this, we have to refer our systems for date time and then we declare prop tap and we say string and expense given to whom did we pay that expense, this is that property, and then we have obviously the expense amount Okay, so for now we will declare this variable. This will be our primary key. So just capital K and Y, this becomes your primary key, and these are our entities. So we will all tag this as required. So what we'll do is that we'll tab it required. We will tab this required, and we'll tab this required. There are additional settings and properties that we can define, and we will be defining as and when we proceed with this creation of entity model. So once the properties are defined, we go to our data layer class and we create a db set, that is a table, and we call our expense entity. I need to refer this model class using expense.models. So our expense entity, and what do you want this table to be in your database? So it will be expenses. Okay, so this is my table name that will be created using migration. So expenses will be a table name, that is a db set table name data set, and then this table will have the following fields: property expense id, expense date, expense given to, and expense amount. Now let's go ahead and create this table and the fields in our database through our migration tool. So we click on tools, NuGet package manager, click on package manager console. So once we have over here, we add our first migration code, a code called add migration. We add migration and we name it as initial db creation. Okay, so what will happen is that the moment I hit this, we have defined a model class called entity, and we have defined the table expenses in our data context class. A table will be created and the fields will be created that is defined in our model class. We click on add migration. Migration is started. Migration is successful. Now you can see a file is got created. You can see a folder got created, migration, and initial migration class is created, which will create the command and code to create a table in a database with the following fields. At this junction, the table is not yet created in our database. I just refresh it because we have to still hit one more command that will actually create a table. So add migration creates the necessary class and settings, and now update the database which actually create the tables in a database. Right. So if you go to your database and just refresh, you can see your table is created, and it also creates a historical audit record table. Entity framework migrations, this is the first migration, and this is our table. We go to design view, you can see all the property defined. Okay, till now everything is, I hope everything is clear till now. Now let's proceed. And okay, so now we are over here, we have created the database, we have created the entity model, basic entity model. Now let's go ahead and add our first method, add a first page view that will display all the records from the expense table. In order to do that, let's go to controller, right click, add a controller, and we'll add an empty controller. And as I explained in my section 2 of the course, this is how you should name the controller, and this will be our expense controller. So our expense controller has a default method created called index, and it does not have any view, and the expense folder is also not created. So let's do one thing. Let's right click, let's use the same method and populate all the records from this method. we select. So basically we right click on index, say add view, raise a view, empty view, and we name it, it's by default index, and we click on. So now you notice in the under the view folder you created, system has created a folder called expense because this is the name of the controller, and index is created. So guys, in this video what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy this razor page already I've created for my project so that it saves the time, and we will then I'll explain you the code. That's not a problem. I'll just select this expense cat expense and index, copy this, and this is a controller, but the controller class I will be walking you through. I will not be copying this code. And so this is a controller that which already have, but in this case what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you step by step. So in this case we are just clicking on the index page of expense, and I'll copy this code. I'll explain this code to you guys. Now we'll go to our controller class, and in this over here I define I variable and this. So before there's one more step, so we create a reference of using expense management dot data layer, and read only db context management and underscore context. We define the database db context, and then we create a constructor. Okay, so we generate constructor, and then we define db context over here, and we pass in the context. Okay, so this initializes the database connection string. Now after that we define I enumerable, and we define expense entity. We have to use the model reference, and we say context dot expenses dot to list, and then we pass this to our view. Now if you come back to our index, what I've done is that I've referenced that entity, expense entity, in IEnumerable so that I can iterate and display all the records. This displays a title, expenses. Okay, this should be listing of expenses, listing of all expenses, and then we defined this razor HTML code, a very simple one, which actually defines the first. This is a div, and you can get all this code from how to display and everything from this site, get bootstrap.com. I have actually taken all the examples and code from here. So we look at docs and containers. So all these codes, components and contents, all these things I've taken from here, containers. So if you look at the code, so this is, we define a div, and this we define a first row over here and two columns, one to display view all expenses, second to create a button, and action method to add new expenses. So we defined a reference tag, and we say this controller expenses, so it's expense. I've just renamed to expense, and action create, which is still not created, and add new expenses. Here is like we check the moment once we hit the method, it fetches all the records, and it renders the view. In the view checks model. If the model class as count, Then it will go inside this code. Then we have created a table with a class CSS, which I took it from this website. From here I have taken the table entity class, and I have actually shown it over here. So you look at tables, I have used this one. So this is what I have used. Table stripe. You can use different colors. Over, see, this is over one which I've used it. So here I've used this table stripe border, and over means that you once you move it, you can see it's the highlighted rows. And then what I do is that I created this expense date category. So this category is section which I'm not displaying right now. I'll explain this category separately because I need to explain the foreign key reference. So for now I'm removing category from here, and so we have expense date given to amount, expense date given to an amount, and these two buttons which will actually update and delete record. Right now there is no code written. This method is not there in the controller, which will add it gradually. So these are the two methods: expense details for update and record. And finally, if the model count is less, then it is less than 0, then we show no expenses created now. So this is what the code is. I have explained the code. Let's go ahead and execute this project. Fine, so we can see this page over here, and in order to call that page, remember what I explained. So first we need to call the controller name, that is controller name express, and then we are calling the method, that is index. What this will do, this will actually call the index method, fetch all the records from the table. Right now there is no record, but we'll add it and we'll show it to you. So we call this method, and right now you see there is no records. View all expenses, no expense created yet, and new button. Now if you try to click the button, look at the extreme in the browser, in the extreme left side bottom, it says localhost expense, which is our control name, and create. Now currently this create method is not there in our project, so that is why we'll get an error. What we are going to do now is that we will be creating create method to add new expense, and then we will be also writing code to delete and update the expense record. So let's get started. So now since we have created the method that will fetch you the list of expenses from the table, let's go ahead and create method to add expense record in our database tables. So if you notice in our view, when we pasted this code, we had mentioned a line of code over here, which is actually going to create a new record. So we need to create this method over there in our controller. So let's go ahead and just copy this code and paste it and name it as create. Why create? Because we have kept the name of the method as action method as create in our expense controller. So that is the reason I have created over here. And let us pass the entity expense details as a parameter, and we're going to remove this line of code and mention if model state dot is valid. If all the properties have value, that means it's a valid model. And we call the context class that expense dot add, and we pass in our expense details. Next we say context dot save changes, and then we say return redirect to action index page, return view. So this will be okay. So the first time the method calls when the page is rendered, this code will not be called and it will return the view. Now we need to build the, once you added the method, what we need to do is we need to create the view for this create method where actually user will go and punch in the records. Okay, for that we have to create a razor page. So right click on the create, say add view, just copy this method because our view should be the same name. Right click, add view, empty razor view, and we click on, let's say add. You see now under the experience, now we have two razor pages, two views. That is, one is index, which we already have completed, and second is create. Now this create, we need to create the controls to accept value from the end users. So I will go ahead and take the razor code, create, and okay, so I pasted this and explained it. So here we are not using I enumerable because we are not going to iterate entire record and display it. We are going to use a single record. So we are just referring the entity class. So expense entity, and this will be our title. Then we are creating a form method, and asp.action is create. So the moment I click on submit, the create method will call and it will post all the values. So here we have the title. So this is the div for the title. This is our div validation summary. Right now I have not added any validation summary over here. So what, in order to do validation, I'll explain what I'll do is just I comment this code right now, and in fact these are the tags. So basically div row class row is the first row, and then we are adding an label called expense date, and then an input as an expense date, which will be a date picker. Then we are adding a validation summary. Okay, then we don't require this class. As I told you, this will be covered in the next section where we explain the foreign key, how to add a foreign key in a database, and how to link that in our view. So then we have expense given to, and then we have expense amount. Right now we have added a validation, but actually we have not added any properties in our model class. So I'll explain that also once we load this page. And finally we have an input type submit, and then another action called index, which will get you back, navigate back to the list page. So this is a simple form which we have created. Now our create view is already done. What we need to do is that we will try to run the command, build the project, and see how does a view look. And then once we add a simple record, we'll go ahead and add the validations also. I'll tell you how do you add the validation in this module. So we select expense, and then we say index. So this has no expense right now. We click on add new expense. So this is a form that we displayed, record your expense. We have the date, and we have expense given to and the expense amount. So if you want, we can just add one record. We'll see whether we'll just add a debugger in our class create, and then we say given to digital tech joint, and then given, and we click on save. So this method is invoked, and we can see all the values are there. So we click on step into the code, and this adds the record, this saves the record, and it redirects back to index. So now we can see this record is added. However, we have noticed one thing is that we have not added any validation. Also, we notice that when I select a date picker, it shows also the time. So I just want a date, I don't want a time. So how do we do these two things, adding validation and formatting our date controller to show the date? And also, if you notice the labels, look at the labels: expense date without space, expense given to, expense amount. So if you want to change the display or this label, how do I do that? Everything can be managed in our entity class. Let's go ahead and do that. I remove the breakpoint from here and I go to our model folder and we go to our expense entity. First thing we are going to do is enter and say this is already required, expense date is required. But then with this I also like to add a message. If people don't select, user don't select, I say error message, please select expense date. Okay, so this is how we define a validation. Then I explain that I just want in my calendar to display the date, not the date and time. For that I need to say date data type, and this will be data type, and this is date. This is just date. And I mentioned about display, so I say display and the name is expense date with space. Similarly, we do the same settings for expense given to. So we say required, error message, please enter expense given to details. Okay, this is one. Also, I could like to add a validation that the whatever expense to we are mentioning should be at least, it cannot be less than say 3 characters. So for that we can say minimum length and say at least I want 3, because the name can be Bob or anybody. So minimum 3 should be there. And if it is not there, then I display an error message that the name of the expense given to is too short. Okay, then we have added the required field, we have added a validation, and finally display. So just copy this and we say display name is, we can say paid to, this is 100. And similarly we can copy these, this already there for the amount, and we say required and we say enter, please enter expense amount. Now here we don't require this, but we can add a validation of range. It's okay, so and say double dot max value, and then if this criteria does not match, please enter a valid expense amount. And finally we say display name as expense amount. So we have set up our properties in a model. We've added the validation, we've added the display and date control parameters and everything. Now let's go to our Azure code create and we just can enable this. Okay, validation summary and rest all remains the same. Now if you run the application, before we run the application, what we do is that we are typing the URL every time. So let's go ahead and add this menu item in our main master layout page. For that you go to view, click on shared, click on underscore layout, and here we are going to remove this show demo and we are going to use our controller name is expense and our method is index. This will show you list of expenses, and I say my expenses. Okay, so this is done. So once we do this, we click on my expenses. We are able to see, now we click on add new expense, and you are able to see expense date with a space, and then we are able to select only the date paid to picture, and then amount is 400, and we click on save. If you try saving the record, then you can see all the validation coming in place. So this is how we have added the record. Now let's go ahead and write the code to update and delete the record. Now if you go to the view page, we had two methods over here. So we had created, this is an expense controller, not expenses, and then we have added two methods, get expense details for update, and we are passing is ASP under hyphen route hyphen ID, which is the expense ID, which should be passed the moment you click on the update button. Now in this case we don't have the method created in the controller expense class. So let's go ahead and create the method for update now. First select controller, go to expenses. So this will be the name of the method, and let's copy this code, click on and paste it over here. Okay, so get expense details for update. So what are we going to do? We don't require an entity class over here. We are going to pass ID, that will be expense ID, and basis the expense ID passed, we will fetch the record first. So say expense details, and context class dot expense dot find, and we pass the ID. Now if the expense details is null, then we'll have to say not found. Okay, else we return this to our view. So we just remove this and we return this to our view, same expense details. So this view is still not created. Let's go ahead. Our backend, our controller code is ready, and we just right click, add. So I need to just copy this so that it's exactly same name. We select razor view, so our view gets created. So I'll just copy paste the razor page code. This will be very similar to create. This will be very similar to create. So the same, we have the entity class, and then we update. Here one thing you should note that after the form method update, now this update method is something which actually do the update. Please understand this method was, the moment you click on update, what it does, it actually fetches the record and shows the record to you, so that you can go ahead and make the changes and then click on the save button. Now when you click on the save button, the actual update method is called. So I just want to highlight that. So this is the action method which we'll be creating in our controller called update, which will actually do the update of the record. Then we have this hidden variable in, that is the expense ID, which will actually store the moment you click on update, the page is displayed, that is this page is displayed, get expense details, and in that page when you click on the save button, the record is posted and this ID is hidden over here. Okay, we should actually pass to database for the update. This remains the same. Okay, it's similar to our create page, and as I told you, I'll just remove this because this I don't require right now. category, and rest all remains the same. Okay, now let's do one thing. Let's also go ahead and add this update method in our controller so that we can see things in action. What we need to do is just copy this. Okay, and here you will pass the entity because this will have entity class, and this will be just update. This will be post method. Okay, and this will actually find the so we will be using this code over here. Create code will be used for update, but with a small change. So it will still go ahead and check the model validity, and instead of add, it will say update and save changes, then redirect to the index page. This is the code for actual update. So our code is ready. This will fetch the record, show it to the user for making the changes, and this will actually update the record. Let's go ahead and see things in action. Click on my expenses, click on update. So now see, this is a get expenditure for update passing /2, that is in this 2. I will go ahead and change the date to 5th May. I will Richard Rodriguez, and I'll change the amount to 5,000 and click on save button. So you notice the record date is updated, name is changed, and even the values is updated. So this is how our update worked for us. Now let's go and quickly also add the functionality to delete the record, which will be much similar. I'll just show it to you. It is added quickly. So if you go to the index, we have given the name of delete as. So this is a method get expenditures for delete. This will be same as R for update. So let's copy this same method, paste it, and give this the name. Now we'll have to create this, but this time when we create a razor view for this, it should be all disabled because we will not giving option for user to make some changes. It will be read only. So I'll just copy that razor page code for delete. Notice in this everything remains the same. We still have an expense ID as a needed parameter. We have an action method called delete, but for every controls we have one more additional property set called as disabled, disabled, and disabled. So you'll only have a read only view. We take a final call and then click on the button delete, which will call this method in the controller class called delete and actually delete the record. So let's go ahead and also add this method called delete. So let's copy this code and paste it. Now this will be delete. Okay, and we don't have to pass the entity. Expense ID, and we use this code and we paste it over here. So it will first find the expense ID. If it is not found, then it will say return not found. Otherwise, this is going to delete contents.expenses dot remove, and this will be our expense details, and then dot save changes, and then we are returning back to our index. Yeah, so let's go ahead and check this code. We click on my expenses. Now we add a record, a dummy record to be deleted. So now we are going to delete this record. We click on delete. So now we have the delete your expense. You notice all is read only. You just get an option whether to delete or go back. If I don't want to delete, I'll click on back. Otherwise, I'll click on that and click on delete, and the records get deleted. So guys, in this session, I think so we have covered, I'm sure we have covered this important initial stage of adding the expense details. Notice here in our expense master, in our expense entity, we don't have something called expense category, which is important because for any expense we need to define or tag it, or what is the expense for. It is for stocks, it is for paying your gas bills, or it is paying for electricity bill, or your EMI for your loans and everything. So in the next session, I'm going to add expense category, which will be part of the expense category master, and I'll show you how to refer your foreign key in your expense entity by creating a new entity called expense category, and then adding that reference over here as a foreign key, and accordingly we'll change our view. So now what will happen is that in the next section, when you create an expense, you'll also have a drop down to select the expense category and save it. Okay, so we're going to create an expense category master and link it in our expense as a foreign key. Okay, and also we are going to format our entire project as per the look and feel that I showed in the initial video in the walkthrough of the application. So stay tuned guys for the fourth section of this course. Do like the videos and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.